Morning, church. Happy Sabbath. So how do you pick a date to have a sermon or take the sermon? You search on the calendar for those little green spots where there's a long weekend. You pick one of those, and then you take the weather where it's about 40 degrees like today, and you pick that one, and you're bound to have low numbers. Boy, yeah, it didn't work out for me today. Anyways, I would like to start with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I pray that you be with us as we fellowship today, Father, and as we share a message, that it might be to your will, Father, and that it might glorify your name. I pray that in your holy name. Amen. So basically, I don't really enjoy being up here, to be quite honest. But what happens is, I receive a message, and as most of you guys know, I cycle to work every day, so that gives me about 40 minutes of me time in each direction. And this message would keep on hounding me until I come up here and I proclaim it. So I actually had this message last year presented to me, and it's been in my ears ringing since then. And the first date that I could organize to come and stand up here was today. So basically, I want to ask a few questions first. Do you guys think it was a coincidence when Andrew preached 2-3 weeks ago on prayer during the 10 days of prayer? No, it was 10 days of prayer. So I want to ask you, was it a coincidence that Jeff preached on prayer the week after that? That's a bit strange. Is it a coincidence that I'm doing a trifecta today and preaching on prayer once again? So I want to ask the last question. Do you think it's a coincidence that the prayer ministry was one of the last to be filled because there were nobody interested in doing that job until Doug and Ruth, that has absolutely nothing to do, put up their hand just to take the role? I believe there's no such thing as a coincidence when it comes to God. I think He's sending us a message. I think He's telling South Brisbane to start praying again. So I want to run through a few points that I put together, and I'll share some of my experiences and testimonies. The first point on prayer is the question, why are our prayers unanswered? So I went looked up for a few Bible texts, and I came across Micah 3 verses 4. Then they will cry to the Lord, but He will not hear them. He will even hide His face from them at that time, because they've been evil in their deeds. 1 Peter 3 verses 12. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and His ears are open to their prayers, but the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And a third verse, John 9:31. Now we know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is a worshipper of God and does His will, He will hear him. So it's quite evident that if we're not in God's will, He will not listen to us. For our prayers to be heard, we need to pray according to God's will. And a text for that, 1 John 5:14. Now it is the confidence that we have in Him, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. And John 14 verses 13. And whatever you ask in my name, that I will do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So basically what they're saying is, if we need to pray according to God's will. We need to pray to glorify His Son. So basically, I have a story in this regard that occurred in my own life. And this took place a few years ago, well, many moons ago actually. So I went on a road trip with a friend, and somehow I actually not lost my wallet, I left it at home. Can't remember the details, but I remember that I had some cash with me. So we're now this week away. And towards the end of the week, obviously, my cash started running out. And there was a casino nearby. Went to the casino. At that stage, I had no problems with gambling, or it wasn't an issue to me. But I knew that it wasn't right, but it wasn't an issue. So basically, went to the roulette table, put everything on red. Everything I had, I put on red, and they span it. And without being able to stop myself, I shot off a prayer. God, please let it be red, please let it be red. And immediately, I was so disgusted with myself. I realized that I just prayed for a good outcome for my sin. And that brought me to the realization that gambling is wrong. There's such a thing as sin, some things that you just shouldn't do. Well, the outcome was actually positive in two ways. It did fall on red. I did double my money. And secondly, my heart was softened for new truths to be showed to me. So everybody struggles with this one. You feel that whatever you do, your prayers just doesn't go above the ceiling. We're just stuck there. And I want to argue that our prayers always go through the ceiling. There are heaps of angels that are just waiting for our messages to take it to our Lord, our God. I think the problem is the communication back. I don't think we're listening. Ellen White wrote on this: "We shall see that the seemingly unanswered prayers and disappointed hopes have been among our greatest blessings." That's in Ministry of Healing. So I want to say that God always listens. I don't think we always listen back. In Jeremiah we read, "Then you will call upon me and go and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart." There it's clear. God always listens to us. We sometimes need to listen back. We need to pray with faith. Matthew 21 and 22. "And Jesus answered to them, 'Truly I say to you,'" this was just after he cursed the fig tree, "'Truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to this fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and cast into the sea, it will happen. And all things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive." So firstly, we need to be in God's will. We need to pray according to His will. We need to pray with faith. And then there's nothing to stop our prayers from being heard. So how do we strengthen our faith? The way that I strengthen my faith in my life is looking back and searching for God's hand in the road that I've just traveled. So I want to share some of my road with you. My first prayer that was answered, I was about 10, 11, and I prayed for this bike. But this wasn't any bike, this was a special bike. It was a rally bomber. It was the bike to have. And by the time that I actually wanted this bike, my parents said, we'll buy you a bike. And at this stage, I was past all the hand-me-downs. So this was the first bike that I could choose. The problem was they no longer manufactured this bike. So you couldn't get it new, you had to buy it secondhand. And I prayed about it. I wanted a silver one, specifically a silver one. And I sort of let it go. And one day my parents browsed through the paper. Back then there was no Gumtree or Facebook so we're in the newspaper and they're like, "Oh, bomber bicycle, cheap price." And I thought, maybe, couldn't be. So I went and had a look at it. And lo and behold, it was a silver bomber bike. And I was ecstatic when my parents bought me that bike. It didn't even bother me that it was second-hand, because obviously he wanted a new one. But the main message that I received through that prayer was, I was in a time of doubt in my life. I was just a little boy, but I still had doubts. And in this way, the Lord told me, listen, I'm real, I'm there, pray to me. God has perfect timing, even though we might not think so. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Wait on the Lord and keep His way, and He shall exalt you to inherit the land. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him, the soul who seeks Him. Basically, God's timing is perfect. We just need to wait for that answer, listen for that answer. My experience in this regard, I was most probably like 6-7 years old. And the only thing that I wanted was a radio-controlled aeroplane. And I remember back then I couldn't even say radio-controlled aeroplane. I called it a radar plane. My father would always, I never knew the difference. My father would always ask me, what plane do you want? And I would say a radar plane. And he just laughed at me. So I would pray for this. The one night I remember, on my knees next to the bed, praying. And I'm like, Lord Jesus, I'd like a red radio-controlled radar plane. And if it is your will, you could just make it appear next to my bed on the carpet. And I would sort of open one eye and I sort of look and there's nothing there. I'm like, maybe you didn't hear me. Lord Jesus, I don't want to be difficult. It couldn't be any color. Any color plane, if you could make it appear next to me, next to the bed. I'm like, it's still not there. I'm like, maybe it needs more time. Lord Jesus, it would be great if it's there when I wake up in the morning. So I went to bed, and guess what? I woke up the next morning, and there were absolutely nothing. So I forgot about this. And years later, I'm about 16 years there, I built my first radio-controlled glider. And I didn't think much of it. And it was about 3-4 years after that where I actually bought a fully blown radio-controlled aeroplane with the engine and the works. And I realized, but this was an answer to prayer. And I actually wanted to carry it up to my room and set it up so it's there the next morning just to have that experience, but it wouldn't fit. But I realized the second thing is, you have to wait for your prayers. God comes in His own good time. But when I went to the hobby club to learn to fly this thing, has any of you ever flown one of those? It's not easy. On the movies, there's no. No, it took me months to learn how to fly it. And I realized that if I actually got that when I asked for it, it would have been crashed within 5 minutes and gone. So basically, I realized that God's timing is perfect. The next topic I want to discuss is a funny one. Be careful what you pray for. You might just receive it. It's almost like a dog chasing a bus. When it catches it, I don't know what he's going to do with it. We read in Numbers, therefore the Lord will give you... this is when the Israelites were out in the wilderness. And they're moaning and complaining, we want meat, we want to go back to Egypt so we can get meat and so forth. And I love the way that it's written here. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat just 1 day, or 2 days, or 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days, but the whole month. I'm like, a month of meat, not too bad. Until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. I think after a month they were fairly upset with their prayers for meat. And then in 2 Kings 20 we read about it, Hezekiah's life, when the angels came to him and told him, listen, time's up, get your things in order, you're about to meet your Maker. And Hezekiah went down on his knees and he prayed and begged God to extend his life. And it didn't work out well for him. I must be quite honest, if angels came down and they told me, listen, get your life in order, you don't have a lot of time. I'd just be like, yeah, I'm out of here. But then anyways, yeah, I think people tend to forget that we're on a journey somewhere. We've not arrived there. We're not supposed to stay here. So my experience in regards to praying for something that you don't really want. I was a student just starting to work. I had my own business. And I started going to this ministry. It was a small group, about 70, 80 people at a time. And we come from a conservative background. And they had this fully blown band in front, and the session would start with praise and worship for about an hour, hour and a half, and then about a half an hour worth of a message, and that was it. But it was so interesting. And then the praise and worship, at first I didn't like it. It only took a few sessions until I was right up there, hands up. I was doing the whole thing, Jesus, Jesus, and carrying on. And I remember that I had tears running down my face. This was an amazing experience that I had, being up there, and it almost felt that I could see God, I could see Jesus, I could see His face, and I could talk to Him, and He would reply back to me. It was like a two-way communication with the God. And this carried on, and I told Eloise about this. She wasn't too excited. At this stage, we were just dating. And this went on for months. And then something occurred to me. I told her, I have this concern. She's like, what? I told her that I have this connection during this praise and worship session, but I can't find it anywhere else. There's something wrong. So I carried on going there. And at a stage, they couldn't get the band back, and they only did the praise and worship with backing tracks and so forth. And the experience stopped. I didn't have that feeling of connection anymore. And that's when I realized that it wasn't a connection with God. It was just the music. And that's what I find we're currently doing under this church. If you go to camp, they're all about the praise and worship and the music, what God is missing. Anyways, carrying on with my story, they had this missionary there. He came in the one day, torn clothes, shorts, sandals, long hair about to his belt, long beard, and he started his session by saying, "It must look like I came out of the Amazon." And he said, "It's because I have." And he's taken the text serious where it says in the Bible that Jesus won't return until we've spread the word, the gospel to each and every corner. And he said, well, nobody wants to go into the Amazon. I will. And he had this story. He said that he's been doing ministry work for the Lord for years. And he doesn't have a story to tell people when he is up in front. He doesn't have a miracle in his life. So we prayed for a miracle. He said, please send me a story that I can exalt to people to tell them about you and how great you are. Long story short, he ended up, I would almost say on the short end of a stick, but it was actually the pointed side. He was in the Amazon, and he was surrounded with about 5, 6 warriors, and they were about to kill him. So over there, it's nothing to kill somebody before breakfast and have him for breakfast. That's the norm. And what he did is he said God's name in their language. And these fierce warriors just dropped their spears and ran off. And the interesting thing is, they did not know what that name was because they've never heard it. So that sounded like a good idea to me. And I prayed, Jesus, if you give me a story, I would exalt it in front of the masses. I made a promise. And nothing happened for weeks. And then you guys know how you have one of those terrible days where everything seems to go wrong. So I had about a month, which included a car smashing me from behind and everything in my business just going wrong. And the one day I came home after work And as I got out of my car, I heard a hissing sound coming from it, like sss. So I'm walking to the front, hoping to find a snake. But yes, I had a puncture, and the air was escaping quite quickly. The tire was pretty much halfway deflated by now. So I'm like, I've got this important meeting tomorrow morning, first thing. What I'll do is I'll get up early and I'll change the tire and I should be all right. So I walk away. And as I walked away and I looked back at my car, I realized that I've been in an accident. And the bodywork was actually bent over the spare wheel. I wouldn't be able to get that tire out. And that was the last straw. I pretty much almost collapsed. And I went down and I looked up and I pointed to God and I told him, God, I've done what I can. You take this one. And I had this immense feeling of relief. So I went back, I went into the house, had dinner, had a sleep. The next morning I woke up. When I got to the car, the tire didn't deflate anymore. It was exactly the way it was. So I get in the car and I'm like, this is an answer to prayer. I've got this butterflies and warm and fuzzy feeling in me. And I drive off to the tire shop to get it fixed. And I'm like, it's still fairly early. I need to phone ahead to make an arrangement for this meeting that I'm supposed to have this morning. It was with the director. I was waiting for months to get this meeting. And basically I'm driving along. I'm like, I'll just give it a few minutes until they might be open. And my phone rings. It's an unknown number. I answer. And there's a person on the other side profusely apologizing. I'm like, what's wrong? It's like, oh, the director has been delayed. He'll be an hour and a half late for the meeting. Is that all right with you? I was stunned. How about answer to prayer? And I fixed my tire and I went back there. I had the meeting, a successful meeting, and it was great. So now you would ask me, well, these are a bunch of great stories. Why do you say, be careful what you pray for? Well, to be honest, I think that must probably happened 15 years ago. And this is the first time that I've used this story to exalt the Lord's name in front of a crowd. The Lord brought his side. He did his side of the bargain, and I just never did mine. So be careful what you pray for. You might just get it. A question that we have regularly is, how do I pray about a decision? Should I go? Should I stay? Should I buy? Should I this? Should I that? So I found this text, James 1 verses 5 to 8. If any of you lack wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously without finding fault, and it will be given to you. We just need to ask. It will be given to you. But the next section. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt. Because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. So basically, when you need to make a decision, you take a few steps back and you think, am I in God's will? This decision that I have to make, which outcome is God's will and what will glorify His name? And then you have faith and you pray. You tell God, listen, this is my decision, bless it or take it away. So I'd like to share a story of how we've implemented, myself and Eloise, this in our lives. A few years back we were looking to buy a house. We had a bit of a deposit, but we weren't too sure. I didn't even have a full-time job. And basically I had this advice from a friend. It's like, just buy any house. Put tenants in there if you don't like the house, but just get into the market so that your capital would grow with your investment so that you could buy another house at a later stage. So this was during December holidays, and in January we came back and I started looking at realestate.com.au, and it's the very first time I looked, and I saw this house, and it just ticked all the boxes for us. And I showed Eloise, and she was quite excited, and the odds were stacked up against us, but we prayed. I said, Jesus, if this is your will, give us this house. If it's not, take it away. So the first hurdle was that the open house was obviously on Sabbath. So I phoned up the agent, goes through to his voicemail, and I tell him, listen, we can't come on Saturday. And that's all. I just said that we're interested, I can't come on Saturday. Hear nothing back from him. And I'm like, I've got faith. You know, if the Lord wants this to happen, he needs to come from his side. So 2 days later, the agent actually phones me back. It's like, I hear you can't come on Saturday. How about Friday afternoon? Told them as long as it's early, that's fine. So we went and we saw this place, and it really ticked most of our boxes, and we were quite happy with it. And Tuesday comes. This was the Friday. The next Tuesday, the agent phones us back. It's like, are you guys still interested in this place? Would you like to make an offer? We said, yes, we would. And I asked them, listen, how did the open house go? So they listed this house at a very low price just to get people in there. He said, we had about 20 couples come through. So yeah, there's some offers already come in. So we placed an offer on this place. And within hours he phones us back, says, listen, the owner signed, it's conditionally yours. And we were so excited. We couldn't believe, because this happened within a week since we started house hunting. And I was so excited. And we went to a small group, which we meet pretty much at that stage, every week it was. And I told my friends, my small group, listen, we've just bought a house. And everybody was super excited. It's like, excellent. Wow, where did you buy? And I said, in Rockley. They're like, as you guys can see, there's a bit of an attitude against Rockley. So they're like, yes. Can you, and so Happiness went to, can you guys still get out of it? I'm like, why? Well, like, you know that it's a flood zone. I'm like, yes, we're aware of the fact that it's a flood zone, and that's why we can afford to buy there. You know, that's it's easier. So basically, I told them, my friends, listen, this is God's will. We prayed about it. You know, a lot of people say that, and it might not be God's will, but we believe that it's God's will. Anyway, so we're going through this Bible study, and this is the first time I really considered the fact that it is in a flood zone. And I was thinking about, I just had this scenes of floods running through my mind. I remember just before we moved here, my friends told me, don't go to Brisbane, it floods. So I go onto YouTube, Brisbane floods. And they have this section where a whole footy field is pretty much covered with water. That footy field is like 200 meters away from our house. We walk past it on a daily basis. Anyways, so I'm just thinking flooding in a river, and what have we done? And I'm like, but have faith. If this is not for us, God will still take it away. So Anthea had for our ministry or our Bible study, she had a little box, a treasure chest, with little rolled up pieces of paper in there, little treasures. And she had like small tweezers. So she passed this box around, and everybody had to select one at random. And then you unrolled it, and it was a promise, a text from the Bible. I can't even remember what mine was. I'm just like flooding water, swimming. It's like, ew. So Enya picked this one, Isaiah 43 verses 2. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. I'm like, done. I'm not concerned anymore. This must be God's will. So the next obstacle was we needed to get a loan. pretty much everybody would know that you need to be employed. Well, you guys might have been employed. If you're new to work, you need to be employed for about 6 months before they would even consider you for a loan. I started working that December. I had a full 3 weeks under the belt. And the first place we went to said, not a problem. As long as you're full-time employed, we'll give you the loan. So basically, we moved into that house, and we've been living there for, 2 years now. And I believe that the Lord has placed us there. We have neighbors coming in and going. Pretty much all our neighbors are renters, so they're only there for about 6 months at a time. And next to us lives 2 brothers. And the one has come back to me and he said, do you know, out of the blue, he's like, do you know, I believe the Sabbath is the 7th day. And his brother has diabetes, and he's like, I'm going to go on a vegetarian diet. So I think the Lord is really placing us where we could do work for Him. So the last thing that I want to touch on is how to listen to God's voice. So back in the 90s, I think, there was this movie out, You've Got Mail. Has anybody seen it? Has any husbands and boyfriends been tortured through this hour and 40 minutes most probably of terror? So, but the good thing about watching it with your girlfriend is you just need to show up. You don't actually have to watch the movie. The only thing that I could remember about this was it's Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. I think they met somewhere, and then they started emailing, and they had this relationship starting through email, and that was just when the internet started. So every time they send a mail, it would arrive on the other side, and there's a little voice in the computer says, "You've got mail," and then they would write something back, and then the next person would just be waiting for it. It's like an early version of like Messenger or WhatsApp, or which we have on our phones. You know, when you're in love, you send a message and you just sort of can't put the phone down. You're just waiting for a reply to come. And what I believe is this is the relationship we need to have with God. You know, we need to send Him mail and receive His mail. It's quite interesting how you receive a message without even expecting it. Like I'm sitting down there during children's story, and Maureen sends me a message. Never heard of text written. So basically, we need to keep our eyes open on when you might receive a message. I want to share a quick story regarding how I have received a message about this church. So some of you might know, some of you might not know, but a few months ago, I think about 1.5 years, the church were not sitting pretty. We were losing members, we were low on numbers. It became evident that we don't really have finances to support ourselves for much longer. And the last straw was the fact when we lost pretty much all our parking. And I remember discussing this with Pastor Mark one night, and I told him, what are we going to do? I told him, I'm so stressed out about the well-being of this church. And he had a simple reply to me. He's like, don't worry about it. Like, how can you not worry about it? He's like, no, it's God's church. He'll look after it. I'm like, really? Yeah, we should take some responsibility. And well, we can argue with the pastor. Took his message home. And I think it was a few weeks later, Eloise is a treasurer over here, and she would receive a lot of mail in a folder that would have come to our mailbox. And after service, we picked up the mail, and there was one letter addressed to a random person to a random address. And Eloise is like, oh, well, let's do our good deed for Sabbath. Let's go and drop it off. I'm like, yeah, okay, if it's close, we'll do that. So I put it in the GPS. It says about 5 minutes. And it took us down O'Keefe and around and around and around. And basically, we ended up, I was completely confused to where I was, but in the road just opposite the railway line. And as we parked, and Eloise walked in to go and deliver this message to the mailbox, we'll just drop it in. I quickly counted, and I saw that this was Sabbath afternoon. There's about 25 car parks available in the street. And I'm like, super excited, like our issue's been resolved. But it wasn't the car parks. I could feel this warmth in my heart, and I could feel this message saying, South Brisbane, I've got you. Don't worry, I've got you. And since then, I wasn't worried about South Brisbane anymore. It's not in our hands. God would look after us. So in conclusion, just to summarize, God always hears us. We need to pray aligned to His will. God has perfect timing. Be careful what you pray for. Step out in faith and accept the outcome. We'd like to close in reading this verse from Matthew 7. Matthew 7 verses 7. Ask, and it shall be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be opened. Amen.